Natural disasters are occurring all around the country. And if you were affected by a disaster, do you know who or where to get help from afterward? In this video, we're going to talk about what the resources are that you need to know about now so that if a disaster ever strikes in your area, you're prepared to deal with the aftermath. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and today we're talking about where to get help after a disaster. There's a lot happening anytime there's a large-scale natural disaster, and it can be very difficult to access assistance during that time. And September is Preparedness Month, and there's actually a great collaboration between many YouTube creators here in the prepper community about this month and why we all need to prepare. And I thought it'd be important for us to share the information here as to where you can find help. With storms like Ida and with the wildfires in California, it's easy to understand why people might need additional assistance either during or after an emergency. And if you want to be as prepared as you possibly can be for any natural disaster style event, then hit the subscribe button below, because here we're trying to share information that can help prepare you for whatever might come your way, okay? So, what is your options? What are you able to access during an emergency? So for immediate assistance, especially related to medical help, obviously still, according to FEMA, the suggestion is to call 911. Now we know during most large-scale emergencies that 911 is likely to be overwhelmed. They will not be able to answer every call, and they definitely won't be able to respond to every call. So one thing I would suggest is to look up your local fire department and local police department phone numbers and store them in your phone if you haven't already, or at least have them stored somewhere in your home, so that way you can access those lines if needed when 911 is no longer available. Now there's no guarantee that those police departments or fire departments won't be in the same situation as your 911 emergency response center, but you'll at least have one more option to try before you have to move on, because 911 is most likely not going to be extremely helpful during a large-scale disaster situation, okay? After that, you have shelters as being another form of assistance. So whether or not it's medical or whether or not it is just the fact that you were displaced or you had to evacuate your area and you're not sure where to go, shelters are an important thing to understand now so that you have the ability to relocate to one if need be. And the Red Cross website is one of the best places to get information about shelters for any kind of an emergency situation. If you go on their website, you just type in your zip code or your address, and it'll actually pull up all the shelters in your area. And I would suggest getting the addresses or the information about those shelters put away and stored somewhere now so that you're aware of where you might need to go in case it ever comes to that. Okay, and just a couple of things to let you know about the shelters that are ran by the Red Cross. They don't cost anything. They offer medical assistance, they offer food, they offer shelter, all the things you expect them to offer, but they don't allow pets, so keep that in mind, because you have to prepare ahead of time if you have pets that they won't be able to come with you, and they don't allow weapons of any kind. So obviously a lot of us care about self-defense and want to be prepared for whatever might happen after a disaster scenario. But if you are to go to a Red Cross shelter, they are not allowed there for, certain reasons, and that's something you have to understand and be aware of ahead of time. So I wanted to bring that to your attention because clearly pets and self-defense are two big topics here in the preparedness community, all right? So what about for immediate needs? So 911's not working, the shelters aren't somewhere you can go to, or maybe they're too far away, or maybe it's not something you really necessarily need to do, but you still need assistance of some sort, okay? Then you need to contact your local emergency management agency. And the way to find that information is usually through your county. So if you were to find or search your county online and then you would type in, emergency management, generally you'll have the contact information of whoever manages that department for your county. You can reach out to them ahead of time and get whatever information it is you might need, but at least have that information stored away so that you know who to call if your other options are no longer available during an emergency, okay? So those are basically who you can reach out to in an emergency. After that, where does it go from there? Because your options are extremely limited. The government knows they cannot respond to every single person during a large-scale disaster, so they just aren't going to try. It's way too difficult. So there's a lot of planning and preparation you need to put in place now, so that's not your only option. After a disaster, and when things, start to come back, but you're not really sure where to turn for additional help, there are FEMA DRCs, which is the Disaster Recovery Centers, okay? And those are located generally around a disaster area. They're set up on the fly, and they're open for the people who need the assistance there. But mostly they're just administrative. There's not going to be help in the sense of medical. There's not going to be help in the sense of emergency. It's really just for applying for assistance, checking statuses on assistance applications and stuff like that, okay? But if you need to find out where a DRC is near you, this is information you might want to have now that you can put away in case it's harder to access during an emergency. And you would text DRC space zip code and then text that to 43362. That should show you the different DRC locations in your area, okay? So, what will that do for you? Well, it depends on what it is you need, but generally, like I said, it's administrative assistance only. So, emergencies still kind of take priority, right? Who do you get help from? Well, even the government says it's you and your network and the people in your community. And that's why it's so important to build community and network and MAG and everything else related to preparation now, because you are the help. And that's actually an exact training course that they have on ready.gov. It's you are the help until help arrives. And that's because they know that they cannot help everyone. And that is in regards to an emergency situation involving somebody being, critically injured or something along those lines. But at the end of the day, it has the same meaning for emergency disaster response. You're the help. You need to learn what you need to learn now so that way you can respond in the correct manner whenever something like this occurs. And you need to make sure you have contact information for those who are part of that community or network stored away and ready to go now. What that means is you have your friends, your family, your emergency contacts all stored in your phone. And one thing I'll suggest to you is have identifiers for people who are emergency contacts, right? And have different people in your community that you can contact that are, certain leaders within the community if possible. But when it comes to even things like your wife or your husband or your daughter or your grandfather or whoever it might be, make sure you have them in your phone as who they are in the sense of relation, not by name. Because then in an emergency situation, if somebody else has to access your phone because you're out, they know who to call based on the nomenclature that you have within your contacts. So your wife should be wife. So that way they know who wife is if they ever have to access your phone versus it being your wife's name, which does not necessarily state any said relation to you. And that should go for everybody else as well. Of course, it's not gonna need to be a thing for every single person in your phone, but what I'm trying to say is that these are the things to consider and take care of now. There's also the ability to label somebody with ICE, which is basically stating that somebody's an emergency contact, so that way if FEMA or anybody else has to access your phone and needs to know who to contact, those people are listed in that way. So there's multiple ways that you can set things up so that the emergency contacts are there, but the community, the network, and your immediate family and friends are the people you really have to rely on in a disaster. That's who you're probably gonna call for help. But wait, don't call, because the networks are gonna be congested. So the suggestion from the FCC as well as FEMA is to use text messaging or email or SMS or even social media before trying to make phone calls, because generally the lines are busy, there's tons and tons of call network congestion, and texts get through easier, they use up less data, and then people can get messaging back and forth and communicate a little bit easier during a disaster. So that is also suggested when it comes to who you're contacting and how you're contacting them, okay? So the other thing you can do is monitor your TV and your radio for any additional updates on the conditions or the information that you might need in the sense of what to do next. But that's about it. And that's why I wanted to bring this up to you, because yes, there are some options, right? Of course, there's 911, emergency response, and first responders. When that doesn't work, okay, then you have shelters that are basically designated locations that have assistance at them, but you'll have to get there. And after that, you have your local emergency management agency. And then that's it. It's just you after that. Keep this in mind, because it's very important that you have these conversations with your family, with your friends, with your community now, so that you know who you're going to rely on during an emergency. So, if you ever do need to call FEMA for some reason in order to get help during a disaster, the phone number is 1-800-621-3362. And that's something that I'll put in the description as well as in the pinned comment, so you guys have access to that information if you ever need it, as well as the text number for the disaster recovery centers as well. These are things you have to decide for yourself whether or not you're going to utilize in the event of a disaster. But If you do need to, the information is there. And if you don't need to, it's probably because you're very well prepared. And that's exactly what we're trying to do for everybody in this community. And that's hopefully why you're here watching this video. So if you ever have any questions for me, leave them in the comments below. Even if I don't get to it, somebody in the community generally will. There's some great information there. And if you need anything from me, you can send a message to me directly from magicprepper.com. Without anything else to say about where to get help during a disaster, that's going to be it for Magic Prep.